Hello, and welcome to Booked Solid, New Canaan Library's podcast for adventurous readers across all genres. I'm your host, Kathleen, a collections librarian.
And I'm your host, James, a reference and instruction librarian.
And today we are discussing The Antidote by Karen Russell.
So before we get started, we're going to do a quick non-spoiler plot summary. The Antidote is set in 1930s Nebraska in a town named Uz. The Dust Bowl is devastating the Great Plains at this time, with extended drought and huge dust storms, and the resulting agricultural ruin is leading many farmers to abandon their plots and become refugees desperate for any way to make a living. Our story follows four people whose lives intersect in town. The Antidote is a prairie witch who lives and works in town, with her job being to act as a kind of blind vault for people's memories, which people can deposit into her and then retrieve when they want to remember it. Harp Oletsky is a farmer in town whose niece Dell comes to live with him after her mother dies, and who attempts to become an apprentice to the Antidote. Finally, Cleo Alfrey is a black photographer who is sent to photograph the effects of the Dust Bowl by the government, which is a job made harder when her camera breaks and the replacement she finds seems to be taking pictures of things that aren't there. These four are forced to reckon with the disaster that a dust storm brings when it hits the town, and are called to an even greater reckoning when several seemingly supernatural events and coincidences bind the fates of all of them with each other, the town, its past, present, and future.
All right, so what were our initial impressions of the story?
I liked this book, but I feel like I didn't like it as much as I thought I was going to, especially because of how strong it started out.
I think that's fair. I will say that it's a book that I've liked more as I've reflected on it than when I was in the process of reading it. Because I think it has so many great ideas, so many big ideas, but it was hard to hold all of that in my head while I was reading it. So it was something that I've appreciated a lot more on reflection when I've actually had time to think about them, rather than just try to figure out, okay, where is this going and how does this tie together?
Yeah, this is a book that definitely benefits from reflection, like looking back on it. But certainly while I was reading it, I found myself getting a bit confused and was maybe hoping for maybe things to be ordered a bit differently, or maybe some structural things to be addressed to kind of address the concerns I found myself starting to have, especially towards the latter end of the book.
I think that's a good point. When I think about the structure, and maybe this is just based on the last book we read and my experience with Karen Russell's wonderful short story writing in general, but I was thinking about how much more I would have liked it as a collection of linked stories.
Interesting.
And I don't know if this actually would work, but I was just thinking about how I loved all the individual parts, and you'll go a little bit more into the different details, but just like the vignettes of it, with like a girls' basketball team beating the odds and winning a championship, or like a teen girl teaming up with the town witch and they're like deceiving the town and protecting themselves through these stories, or like just like the time traveling camera.
Yeah,
I feel like all of those as like short stories, and then they come together at the end at the Founders Day sort of culmination. I think that would have been an interesting way to see it. But I mean, we'll get into this a little bit more, but that was one of the things that I was thinking about.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a pretty good point there.
Because they are such big stories that I think it would have been easier to keep track of as one story, and then you see how they tie together. But, I mean, it also just might be a book that's a lot easier on a reread to just fit everything into your head.
Sure. And to give listeners an idea of what we're talking about, let me just dive into this spoiler plot summary. So, spoiler warning, if you haven't read the book and you're interested in it from any reviews you've read or just from our description of it, definitely give that a read before you finish listening to this, because this is going to spoil the rest of the story for you. So, the sheriff in Uz is an all-around bad person, basically, and he's running for re-election. He's been making use of the Antidote's powers to ensure that unpleasant actions that he's taken or contradictory testimony to cases that he wants closed is being forgotten and locked up within the Antidote. When the dust storm hits the town, the Antidote finds herself supernaturally bereft of all of the stored memories, and the process in which she can receive deposits, she can now hear what people are saying to her, which is a new thing. And that puts her in incredible danger, because if the townsfolk find out that she has nothing stored in her vault, well, just imagine a Depression-era run on a bank, but that bank is kind of an outcast woman who does some weird magic. Not going to be good for the Antidote. Luckily, Del Oletsky is very good at spinning tall tales and teams up with the Prayer Witch to create new memories for people who are making withdrawals in exchange for an apprenticeship. Though the sheriff does find out that this is happening and sees this as an opportunity to plant false memories in townsfolk who are making withdrawals, which will grant him even more of a political advantage. When the witch refuses this plan, he threatens her life and she flees to Harp and Dovoletsky's farm for safety. The sheriff's plan is further thrown into disarray by a couple things. One is an ill-timed deposit to the antidote that he makes, which reveals that he's been covering up a bunch of murders and basically invented a serial killer to get somebody executed so he could take the credit for saving the town. Another thing that happens is Cleo Alfrey, a photographer, arrives in town, and her cameras, when she takes pictures with her camera, it doesn't produce pictures of what's in front of it, but rather true images of either the past or potential futures of whatever is being caught in the lens. Finally, Harpoletsky has dug into his family's past with the help of the antidote and found out basically that his father has been telling a lie, or rather told a lie, which led to the mass deaths of many Pawnee people who were the original inhabitants of the land that was built on. And that fact that happened has been intentionally forgotten by many in the town. With a picture of the sheriff disposing of an inconvenient murder victim in hand thanks to Cleo's camera, the group think that they can force him to abandon his goals and protect the antidote from his wrath. While Harp also believes that he can convince the townspeople to face the part of the town's history that they've all forgotten. He volunteers a stage for the plan, a speech that he's about to give at the local Grange meeting that he's the newly elected leader of. Things start very well with the display of photos, but a riot occurs while Harp continues laying out evidence, and the group is forced to flee, aided in their escape by the sudden arrival of a long-hoped-for rain. When they return to the farm, the sheriff's already there and threatens the group, but is driven away by an angry cat, we'll talk about that, and supernatural lights that appear above Harp's field. The book ends with Harp remembering a memory that had been given away, returned to him supernaturally, indicating that the people of town might also be regaining their lost memories. He wonders what might happen in the wake of such a restoration.
All right. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of plot. There's a lot going
Yes.
on.
So that cat that I just talked about.
Yes.
The cat is the sheriff's cat.
Yes.
And in the beginning of the book, it's revealed that the sheriff drowned the cat's kittens because he didn't want to deal with them. And the cat did not forget that. And so when the cat sees its chance to attack the sheriff, it takes it. That's the cat's plot.
And the cat does have a perspective chapter.
Yes. Yes, it does. Other things that I left out is, of course, Dovoletsky's rising basketball career and an all-women's basketball team, where she goes off on, basically, she goes to compete in the championship game despite it basically being the apocalypse out there with dust storms, and people are just kind of not caring about this at this time.
A very harrowing chapter, yeah. It does not seem like they're going to make it, but...
Another thing that I left out of that summary was the antidote's past, which is very important because it ties into her backstory, and her basically main narrative drive throughout the book is trying to reunite with her son, who she believes was taken from her and secreted away when she was put involuntarily into a kind of institution for a woman who had children out of wedlock. The institution said that the child had been stillborn, and that's why there was no child, but she believes in her heart that they stole the child. At the very end of the book, during that farm confrontation, it's revealed that somehow the soul of her son has entered into a scarecrow on Harp's farm, and she is able to basically learn about the life that her child lived before the soul passes on. It's a very moving scene, but not, I would say, strictly relevant to like the narrative summary that I had to give there, but very important, I think, to just the overall book.
Yes. So, I mean, I think, and maybe that's a little bit of the tension, is that we have all of these stories, we want them resolved, we want to see the way they fit together, but some of them feel a little more extraneous to the momentum of the plot. Some of them are a little more character-based. I like that you mentioned the Antidote's backstory, because I do like that those are almost like standalone short story type things. And although they don't necessarily move the plot forward, like those I think are some of the strongest sections in the book for me. And like you said, like it does culminate then in that very moving ending. I mean, there's there's a scarecrow basically from the beginning, and you have no idea why this could possibly be relevant.
Mm-hmm.
And you just know that he sort of has memories and has some sort of life, but is not able to move or interact with anyone. So it is a really nice moment that, I don't think you have any anticipation of what's going to happen in that first chapter with him and what happens at the end.
Yeah. I really think that there's so much wonderful writing in this book that resolution between the Antidote and her son is just so touching and heartwarming. The very end of the book where Harp receives a memory that he lost, and the memory I believe that he receives is the very first thing that we get in the book.
Yes.
The first chapter is a very short description of a time when Harp was a child, and in order to protect the crops that they were growing, the people of the town basically did a mass culling of the jackrabbit population, and they just bludgeoned these animals to death in a pen so they couldn't get out. They just got them and lured them into a pen bludgeon. And it's horrific to read about. It's brutal, and you can tell that Harp is traumatized by this. And at some point his father made him give that memory up to one of the prairie witches, and it comes back unbidden. And for some reason he takes that it has come back to him as a hopeful sign that maybe they can do something with that might be good rather than just forgetting. And it's so well written.
Yeah. Well, I think that first chapter, that memory from Harp's childhood, is such an interesting way to get into the book because it's one of the most disturbing things you'll read in the book right off the bat. And I think,
it's just so visceral.
Picking it up and seeing that and thinking, oh, what am I in for? And as you get deeper into the book, I think it makes sense why someone would want to forget it. So it definitely has the effect of convincing you of why people might go to a prairie witch, of why this is a phenomenon that is so popular in the town. And then getting to the end and seeing the downside of that and why you wouldn't want that. I mean, I think that's all expertly done. I really do like that as just an overarching sort of plot point. So it's funny because reading that was no fun.
Yeah.
But it's so good and it's so necessary for the story.
Yeah. I think that this is a book that's very interested in the idea of memory, like what remembering is, how it shapes people, and the things that people forget for good or for ill, and the things that people try to erase, which is almost always in this book portrayed as a bad thing when you go to fully erase something from your memory.
Yeah, I think that is the strongest theme throughout, and I love the different ways that it is brought up because I think Karen Russell explores it through a lot of inventive ideas that are both magical and mundane. So we have, obviously the Antidote. Mm-hmm. That's the title of the book. I think it means a lot more than just the person, but just this idea. She portrays herself, and it's sort of like a snake oil salesman type thing too. She's the antidote, but that's marketing, right? She's covering up a problem. She's not really solving a problem for them. But she obviously stores people's memories within her, and that's a through line throughout the book. That's something that's important when she loses them as well. And then she starts creating stories with Dell. And then we have also the sheriff, the way he uses the antidote. He takes a lot of people to the Antidote to have whatever kind of horrible memory taken out of their minds, often against their will, in fact. So you have that kind of magical aspect. Then you just have the sheriff, who himself is not magical. He's just a liar. Mm-hmm. You have that camera, which I think is a really interesting idea, which it cannot lie, even if it's showing a scene that doesn't currently contain what happened. It still shows the truth when it's developed. So like all of those things with like memory and reckoning, the way she puts that out there are fascinating. I think she develops that really well throughout the book. I liked all of those things. And then it kind of goes into, I think, just the lesson of how dangerous it is to tell people what they want to hear. Mm-hmm. So we have the Antidote and Dell when they are often telling stories that are pleasant to people, but they're not true. I mean, it's just that the Antidote has lost the real story, and they're giving like a memory of like dancing on stage or something. And then the sheriff obviously lying about the murders. I mean, you talked about that with he's creating a serial killer. No one is safe because those murders were unsolved.
Yeah. The book never circles around to address that. That's kind of a thing that it doesn't seem to feel as necessary to have a resolution on. And that, I can guess, is also part of the way that Karen Russell is making the point.
Yeah.
How are you going to figure out who killed these people if you're just creating something that politically is convenient for this one person? Like, this is the narrative. It works very well for me. We're going to stuff everything else under the rug until...
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's hard because that's not satisfying for a story. You want, killers to be brought to justice. You want a resolution to a mystery. But I did really come around to that as being a choice because I think she is really saying, like, if you don't confront these things, if you don't have these things out in the open, they don't get resolved. So that is always going to be that thread. So I think she did that all really well. But then obviously one of the biggest things, and we get this in the chapter with the memory that Harp recovers from his father.
Yes.
Is with all the cover-up and the crimes done to the Native Americans.
Yeah, to the Pawnee people. Yeah.
In this town, he was, I believe, like one of the town founders. And so this is all leading to Founders Day, and the town was founded about 25 years ago. And there's basically a cover-up. They had their memories taken away so they could sleep at night. But all of these horrible things they did in order to ensure that the town could survive the way they wanted it to be.
Yeah, I believe that the thing that his father did was he basically started telling lies that riled up the townsfolk and basically the United States against the Pawnee. And then that led to mass purges and, displacement that caused devastation to them. And he could not deal with it, so he put it out of his mind. He'd rather have the idea that he's a noble, hardworking farmer who founded this town against all odds. That other stuff is part of it, but not part of the story he'd like to tell about himself. And he didn't intend for anyone to really get that back. He tried to make sure that was unrecoverable for the most part, But
I do think it's interesting because we do have characters who will burn the deposit slip so that it can never be remembered, and he doesn't burn his.
That's true.
He puts it in a box
He
to
burns Harp's memory of the rabbit killing, right?
Yeah,
and that's how it comes back to him supernaturally, but he kept the one for that memory.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting thing, too, that Karen Russell is doing with these slips, in that I think it's definitely talking about, like, one of the things the book is very interested in is the idea of better you than me, as kind of like a great open door towards evil, is the idea of you see something horrible and you think, because I am not in a position to intervene, I can't say anything, I don't have power, I don't have money, I don't have influence. Once I get that, then I'll be able to do something about it. But right now, better you than me. Many characters are thinking about this, especially in the memory of Harp's father. That comes up time and time again. The fact that they put these unpleasant memories, these unwanted histories, these things that they feel so badly about, they put it away, but they have the slip. The slip is like, I can go back to this at any time. Yeah. I can take responsibility for this at any time, and then I can do it, and then I can take action to remedy this. How many people are going to take that slip and go for that when they get a chance to? And how many people are just going to leave it behind?
Right. Yeah, it's all that deferred responsibility. Tomorrow, maybe I'll do it. And then, of course, when we have Black Sunday, which is this horrible dust storm that...
It just rips up so much topsoil, and I think it literally deposited a bunch of it, like, on the streets in front of Congress. Like, it took it across the country.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it just, like, the extent of it is unfathomable. So many people died, including, as we learn later, the Antidote son on that day. So we have this huge environmental disaster, and one of the unintended consequences of it as well is that is the day that the Antidote loses all of the memories she's been storing. So in fact, those people who thought, someday I will get this memory back, someday I will do something, they literally can't. Mm-hmm. And so I think that also points out, like, how much of an illusion that was.
Yeah.
And it also kind of ties in nicely, though, as we're talking about the better you than me.
Mm-hmm.
I think nothing can highlight better just the way in which that's not real. Like, people are more vulnerable than they'd like to think or to admit. And you have these environmental disasters where that can hit anyone.
Mm-hmm.
That can hurt anyone. I mean, it shows the importance of community, and it also shows the vulnerability of people.
I think it's also interesting in that when Karen Russell was writing the book, she talks about how she learned history
Mm-hmm.
and how that really influenced her with this. She says that she was taught history in like a very partitioned way. That there is this idea that indigenous people were dispossessed of their lands through legal, extra-legal, military means over here. This is happening over here. The Dust Bowl, this environmental disaster, that's over here. These are two separate things. Where in reality, they're not.
Mm-hmm.
They really aren't. There's evidence that she suggests in this book and in the afterwards in this book as well, that the way that the Pawnee would farm was not so devastating to the topsoil. While the Dust Bowl was caused by extended drought and things like that, the actions of American farmers exacerbated that problem to the point where the disaster was magnified. And then the government had to step in and be like, here's how to try to mitigate this disaster. But, all these things tied together. It's not like they're happening in silos. And part of that was forgotten and partitioned away. The authors basically make a statement saying that's not how you can approach history. You have to go to it and look at it all. It's all connecting. It's not just this goes here, this goes here. You can't take the things you don't like to think about and put it in a box.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's about, I think, that accountability, and a lot of these characters obviously don't want to confront that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, why we get the ending that becomes so charged, because this is stuff that people don't want to hear.
Yeah. The Antidote in the book talks about how it's not the truth itself that people can't accept. It's very easy for someone to show you a book and say, here's what happened. What people really don't like is how they feel about it, right? Like, I can read something and I'll be like, wow, that happened, but I read the Jackrabbit thing in the beginning and I don't like that. It makes me feel bad to think about. And my first thought is, I wish I hadn't read that.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
if the Antidote was right next to me, I'd turn to her and I'd be like, hello, I have a deposit for you. I like how that structure in the beginning kind of leads you to, it gives you something you don't want to think about and then introduces you to someone who could make it go away.
Yeah.
What kind of temptation would that be? In reality, that's an incredible temptation to just memory hole things.
Yeah. I mean, so this is the thing that, as I'm talking about, okay, people are unwilling to confront these things. It's understandable. It's human. It's relatable. And I think that's one of the things, too, that comes up in different ways. For example, with Harp thinking that his family is cursed, and then he realizes how much his neighbors have suffered as well. And then he realizes that the thing that connects them is they are all human. Everyone has, I think, the capacity for good things and bad things, but we see just the way, if people have that opportunity to forget, do they want that? Is that it makes them feel lighter, right? Dell's friend Val says, you should go to the Antidote and then you'll be lighter to win the basketball game, right? So I think there's that idea of there's a good that can come from it. We can win the game. I can help the team. But what it buries is just not worth the rest of it.
In many interviews, people who are talking with Karen Russell will bring up something that I also think, which is that, when these characters decide to bury parts of their past, they really do take away the opportunity for them to heal, to learn from it, to make necessary repairs to their relationships. That kind of desire to always feel okay about what's going on is not necessarily healthy, as the book talks about. And it's a political book in that sense, There's a political element to this book about this particular period in history. It mentions so many things, it references so many things that were happening at that time that does become overwhelming in many ways. It's talking about the Dust Bowl, the environmental, the economic, the sheer emotional impact of having something like that happen to you. That's in here. It's talking about the displacement of the Pawnee and the betrayal of the Native American peoples by the government with their own treaties, and how they would import settlers from other countries who were themselves being oppressed. Like in Harp's in Harp's family, his father was being kicked out of his land by the Germans who were moving in and kicking him out. That's part of it. They're talking about how even with the economic acts that were being taken by FDR with the New Deal, how the relief money would be unevenly distributed towards white Americans, and how sometimes black Americans would be denied that relief. That was a huge element. The book talks about that as well. There's so many things going on, and it's placing that all in the Dust Bowl narrative. And I think that many readers, myself included, did not view the Dust Bowl as having so much within it. I did view it, as she said in the earlier interview, through a narrower lens of an environmental disaster based on bad farming practices. I did not conceive of all of these things going into that. I did not, and it minimized the scope of the disaster, which is a crazy thing to talk about when you think of the Dust Bowl.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't know how bad it was, and now I'm kind of getting like, oh, it was even worse because I didn't know. And that's kind of like, there's a lot of political stuff in there talking about like house history taught, what is chosen to be highlighted, what is chosen to be partitioned over here, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot going on in this book.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about how sometimes when you have a more limited view of something, you can tell that things aren't fully adding up or don't entirely make sense, but you don't know what you're missing. And I think it becomes very literal in the metaphor of with the antidote and the memories, but also we see those pictures that are hole punch.
Yeah.
So maybe we can talk about that in a second. But I mean, you know, so this idea of bringing everything together and bringing it into context, it really does make for a richer story. And you realize what you're missing only after, I think, it's put into place.
And I think that what makes me upset is there's so many interesting things going on here, but like you said earlier, I'm not sure it all coheres. Like, it doesn't, at the end of the book, I felt, especially during the big scene where Harp is giving speeches to the town, I felt like it was slowing down. The book was slowing down when I felt like it was getting faster. I felt like the narrative was speeding forward, and then there's a bunch of these speeches in which Harp is kind of giving a 21st century truth bomb to these like 1930s Nebraska farmers, and they start taking shots at him like towards the end of it, and a riot breaks out. And I was like, that's probably what would happen if he tried to do this to these people, but I felt like it wasn't working as well as I wanted it to. I felt like things were a little bit too disconnected. I wasn't able to synthesize Dell's basketball playing with what was going on here. I felt like there was too many things happening for me to come away with this like on a really, really high note.
I think it is overwhelming. I think one of the challenges is that Karen Russell has so many great ideas, so much great research, so many things she needs to impart. Like, it's all important. So I wouldn't look at it and say,
this doesn't belong here.
Yeah, right? Oh, this doesn't matter. Like, it's all important. But I think fitting that all in, it does feel overstuffed, and it feels like a lot for the reader to take in all at once. So I do see that as something that does, with the pacing, I think, maybe slow the book down. And like, I don't want to say cut anything, because I'm like, I learned so much and I thought it was so interesting and it is all beautifully written, but like, maybe that is too much to hold all at once.
If we've got like a jigsaw puzzle and all the pieces are here and they belong, it looks off to me. Like, it looks a little off to me. I like what I'm seeing, but I'm like, I don't know if I put this together right. And I do think that it's just it might just be like a grasping so much and trying to make it work, whereas it's such a challenging subject to tackle. I'm not sure if you could tell this story in a way that wouldn't make it feel a little bit overstuffed without a radical reorganization of like characters when they're introduced, how they're intertwining with the story. Like, it would have to be like a major kind of reorganization of these elements. And even in my mind, as I'm trying to think of it, I can't square that.
Well, I think, I've read a lot of interviews where it sounds like she has been working on this story for a very long time in different forms. And I think she's had all of this stuff that she's been able to work through, but then to give it to someone who hasn't been introduced to it,
it's true.
I think that's the trickiest part.
I feel like maybe if I'd done like pre-reading about the Dust Bowl, maybe this would have gone over a little bit better with me because I was trying to learn all these things about the Dust Bowl and this period of history that I was still processing that while also reading the rest of this book, and maybe that impacted my enjoyment of it.
I think she said, she's long been interested in the Dust Bowl,
Yeah.
so this is a culmination of all of that. But, I do think all of these great ideas, like, by the end, I did understand so much more of the metaphors and the things I was seeing, which initially maybe were just confusing or felt out of context. So, like, the hole punched photos, I wasn't initially understanding what that meant.
They just appear in the book sometimes before you even kind of know what they are.
And so I don't know if I was thinking of them as metaphorical at first. I don't know if their context made any sense to me. But then, of course, at the end, it fits together very beautifully in the coda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so throughout the book, there are these pictures, these photos, and some of them have holes punched through them. Like someone just took a hole punch and punched them through it. And these are actual photos that were hole punched by a man named Roy E. Stryker, who worked for the government, basically trying to promote the policies of the government towards addressing the issues that the people were facing, but to also document the struggles that the people were facing in the Dust Bowl era to promote the New Deal.
Yeah, so he's a real person, and he is Cleo Alfrey's boss in
this book,
the story.
Yes. And so throughout the book, you get these photos, and there's these little hole punches in them, and you look at them and say, that's weird. Some of them, sometimes it's people's faces that are punched out, sometimes it's just a hole punch randomly in some random spot in the photo. And as you learn through Cleo's chapters, that's what he would do when he thought that they were unacceptable, or that they were not fit for publication. And in the book, it's implied that some of this is because the right people are not being taken photos of, or it looks like it's staged, or just something's not right in his mind for what his idea of history, what should be captured in this period, what should that look like?
Right.
And so there's a hole punch to prevent that from being used. So at the end of the book, you get some of those with no hole punches in them, and you realize, like, oh, it's another way of kind of reinforcing the idea of how can you make sense of a thing if you don't know the whole thing. That little thing that's missing, that little hole punch,
exactly.
That's as important to the rest of the photo as everything else.
Yeah, so that restoration at the end, whether it's the restoration of memories, and as you talked about, those pictures being, who gets to be included, all of that stuff. So I really do think when I got to that finally at the end, I was like, oh, I get it.
Yes.
But it is maybe overwhelming before you get to that part, because you're like, I'm not sure what this means, because there's just so much of everything.
The relief I felt when I got to that coda chapter where all the photos are restored, I felt like so many things locked into place for me, and I was just like, oh, okay, I like this. This is really good. And it was such a juxtaposition because right before that was the big Grandmaster speech, and I was like, uh-oh. There's a lot going on here, but then that was just such a great resolution.
Yeah, I do think it really wraps up nicely. And I just wanted to talk a little bit more, as we're talking about the speech, and we're talking about photography. One of my favorite scenes, though, is before that speech and before everything takes a turn, because I think this also did kind of spell some things out for me that I was like, oh, this is really nicely done, and I really liked this. But they have that exhibition of Cleo Alfrey's photography that's taken with the time-traveling camera. And it's actually a chapter, though, it's from the Antidote's perspective. But I really thought it was well done, where they have the photography out, and we know that at some point they're going to have the photograph of the sheriff trying to dispose of the body of the woman who was murdered, that he's going to pretend, all of his re-election shenanigans. But before that picture, they have all these photos on display, and the Antidote is afraid to look at them at first. She thinks she's going to see photographs of suffering and evil doing. And then she looks at them and she sees like all of these beautiful, hopeful photos of a world that could be. And the line is something like, the last thing I expected to see was joy. And there are all these captions that are like plenty and audacious, where we had in earlier chapters, Roy Stryker criticizing Cleo for being too poetic in her captions. And now these are just these really strong, like one-word captions. But I don't know, like that really put something into place for me with the idea that it's not just about pointing out the wrongs of a place or things that people are willfully forgetting, but it's also about, like, you can put faith in the future, and you can imagine. It's not about like punishment. Like, I think people, especially during Harp's speech, react so strongly because they feel like they're in trouble.
Yes.
Like it's a punishment. Like they are bad and they don't want to admit that. But, you know, as we see with this restoration and Harp feeling hopeful about his feelings coming back, it's more about, like, you can imagine a better future when you have the possibility in your mind of what that could look like.
Yeah, you have to understand the past in an honest and truthful way to build the tools and communities and, you know, things that you need to go forward into the future is kind of what I think the book is saying at the end. And I think it does come across very well.
If anything, there's too much to think about, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think there's just so much that this book has to offer and so much that I learned from it. So, James, do you have a quote for us?
Yes, I think this is a quote that the Antidote says while I believe she is speaking to her son in her mind. She says, "Ask any stone or flower if it feels grateful to be here. Your mother does not have much advice to pass on, but I can tell you when to be wary. You should be grateful" is a sentence that the powerful wield like a cudgel, which speaks a lot to different things that have happened in this book. There's the immigrants who are coming from Europe into America and then basically being planted down into the West in order to settle and farm and colonize these lands. People are basically telling them, you should be really grateful that you're here. In America, you could be dying in Poland or whatever, or being thrown to the wolves elsewhere. You should be grateful. Don't say anything about anything you see. Don't say anything about anything you hear. Just keep quiet and it'll be all great. That's kind of one of the elements they're talking about. They're also talking about the sheriff basically being like, well, you should be grateful, the Antidote, for, the town letting you be here and for me not running out of town at all times and doing all these kinds of things. There's a lot of times in the book where powerful people are telling the people who are oppressed that they need to, be thankful for what they have. And that's also part of just kind of like, well, be careful.
Yeah, I think that's a great quote that really does sum it up. I mean, when we talk about, well, just the abuses of power obviously is a huge theme of this. I think it almost ties into, as you were saying before, the better you than me sort of thing too. I mean, it's just all of this stuff where it's like everyone looking out for themselves or pushing gratitude onto someone, but ultimately, like, the only way they're going to survive is as a community.
And I feel like the Founders Day celebration, that's the community celebrating something that they think is good, and that's good. Communities should come together and celebrate things that make them proud and make them happy, that's worth being proud for. And then you have this, which is, kind of the opposite of that. You have people bullying you into celebrating stuff, and it doesn't feel right.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, like, you're going to get something out of this book.
Yes.
Like, it has so much to say, and I think it does a lot of it really beautifully, but it is also a lot for the reader.
Yes. I think depending on the kind of reader you are, you might come away from this book a lot higher than I did. I had just structural issues that kind of got in my way of enjoying this to its fullest. But I definitely can see a reader coming to this and being like, this was incredible. I've never read anything like this before.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
Yeah. And I think both of those opinions are completely valid.
Definitely. All right, James, so do you have any read-alikes for us?
Sure, yeah. So if you are looking for something very similar to this in terms of writing, in terms of like magical realism, like historical fiction, you probably can't go wrong with Karen Russell's other major work, Swamplandia, which is about a family of alligator wrestlers in the Everglades who basically run an alligator wrestling theme park that is not doing well. And they are all trying to figure out ways to save it, all of which really are not going to work out very well. This is great if you really love the writing in this, and you enjoyed magical realism, because there's a bit of magical realism in there as well. I think you've read Swampland, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think it's a lot about like grief and heavy issues, as well as just these really wacky details. Like, who doesn't want to read a book about a family of alligator wrestlers?
I want to read about them wrestling the alligators, yeah. Do you have any recommendations?
So, I will say, as we were talking about, like, this book is really unlike a lot of books that you're going to read. So I was at a loss to think about what even comes close to what's going on in this book. And I was thinking, though, about, as I think I mentioned earlier, like, I really did like the sections of the Antidote's past. And so I was thinking about, surely there's not another book that combines witchcraft and a home for unwed mothers, but in fact there is. And that's Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix. So these are girls who are sent to the Wellwood home in St. Augustine, Florida, where unwed mothers are hidden by their families to have their babies in secret, and then, of course, forget any of it ever happened. And if we've learned anything from the Antidote, forgetting is not usually a great strategy and doesn't usually work. But so in this case, 15-year-old Fern arrives at the home. It's 1970. She's terrified and alone, and she meets a dozen other girls in the same predicament. And, I really do love the connection of the girls. Like, they have that beautiful, like, roller skating scene in the Antidote. So I think just when you have these stories of, like, these girls connecting in a really harsh kind of situation, and this is, Grady Hendrix is known for a lot of, like, horror type stories, and the horror in this, I mean, you're like, oh, it's about witchcraft, but also there's just a lot of horror in the sense of the situation. And the terrible things that these girls have to endure in places like this. So in this case, they meet a librarian who has an occult book about witchcraft, and suddenly they have power for the first time in their lives. But with that, there are both good things and then, of course, bad things, and a price that has to be paid. So, if you liked those two things together, I think this is another place to explore those themes.
Sounds very interesting. So we'll not be announcing the next book that we're reading because we are going on hiatus for our kind of winter break. We'll be back in February 2026 with a new book.
Yeah, so I'm excited to take a break, get some reading done, and come back in the new year, and I hope everyone will join us then.
Yes.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.